Morning and afternoon, folks. Really excited to have you join us today. We are kind of doing part 3 of our PSD2 webinar series. Part 1 was about the regulations themselves. Part 2 was about the technical standards and how you can comply. And this one, we're hoping can serve more as a little bit of a recap, but also talk about the business benefits of compliance. You might be thinking I'm crazy for talking about anything regarding compliance other than compliance for compliance sake, but I really do think that we have some content in here that can show you that yes, you can implement a solution just for compliance, or if you use the right solution, which we're going to talk about, we think is FIDO. If you use FIDO, you can really get other benefits for your company that go pretty far beyond just checking boxes during an audit. So the content today, we have a lot to get through, but as Bashara said, please do type your questions in the box as they pop into your heads. We'll do a quick recap on the regulations themselves. We'll talk about some other compliance options. We'll definitely spend some time talking about FIDO and StrongKey's FIDO server in particular. And we're really going to try to highlight all of the benefits beyond compliance that FIDO can bring to the table. We will have plenty of resources to point you to at the end for some additional reading. So who's StrongKey? We were founded in 2001. We're based in both California and North Carolina. And that means we turned 20 years old this July. And for all of those 20 years, we've really been solving what we think are some of the hardest data security problems in the industry. So when customers either can't integrate easily to other options, or there's really nothing on the market that quite solves their problem, they bring us in, and we take a lot of pride in being able to solve those problems. We do have customers all over the world, and when we're not working with those customers and improving our products, we do a lot of effort. We spend a lot of time on kind of the educational side of things. So we work very closely with the NIST National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We've done, I think, 3 or 4 practice guides with them. These are kind of how to secure data in different industries. We're always, doing webinars and presenting alongside the FIDO Alliance specifically and other industry conferences. So we certainly have a lot to keep us busy. The solutions at StrongKey are really centered around these 4 kind of fundamental pillars as we think of them. So we think that if you are encrypting and tokenizing your data so that it's not readable to those you don't want to have access to it, if you're moving away from weak password-based authentication and using things like FIDO to really secure users much more intensely and productively, if you're using digital signatures to verify that your data has not been tampered with, modified in any way, and if this is all underpinned by strong cryptographic key management, cryptographic hardware, we think that you can accomplish what we put at the top here. You can make breaches irrelevant. So our goal is to prevent your company from becoming the next one in the headlines. I didn't know who SolarWinds was until earlier this year, but now it's a household name for the wrong reason. So those are our goals. We think they're certainly within reach, and a lot of our customers do use our solutions for compliance to things like PCI, GDPR, CCPA, and it became pretty obvious, I think earlier last year, that PSD2 could really use some more industry attention. So we'll start talking about exactly how we can help with that. So PSD2, for those who might not be familiar, is the revised Payment Services Directive from the European Banking Authority. So it adds to and supplements their original Payment Services Directive. That was from 2007, and they really wanted to capture a lot of the changes that hit the e-commerce world in that decade span. So that was when mobile phones become much more common. E-commerce really takes off. So certainly they wanted to modernize their regulations, but if you could pull out three of their biggest goals, we think it would be kind of what's on the bottom here. So they want to promote open banking. This is the concept that no longer should your data really be tied up only to the giant banks and card issuers who historically have pretty much hoarded that information and benefited a lot from kind of that monopolistic access to it. Open banking will really free up that data to be shared by new companies that might come into existence, and they think that users can really benefit from that new framework kind of. PSD2 also set some new guidelines for surcharging fees. They wanted to address some of the costs that users would be charged for the movement of money, for transacting in different ways. And most interestingly for us, PSD2 does mandate what's called strong customer authentication for a lot of the transactions in the European Union. So the rollout of enforcement has been a little bit of a mixed bag depending on where you are in the European Union. You might either be recently enforcing this in full, you might be just about to enter the full enforcement phase, but pretty clearly here you can see that this is a very real regulation in a lot of countries, and we can certainly start to expect a lot more enforcement and attention paid to that. So we talked that SCA, Strong Customer Authentication, is one of the goals of PSD2, but what is SCA? A very quick summary is that you can think of it as kind of a additional layer of confirmation that users and buyers will have to provide in order to convince the merchants, banks, all of those upstream folks that convince them that this is a transaction that is legitimate, that you are the user you claim to be, that they should, in essence, allow this transaction to occur. So from a customer point of view, if you're in the middle of a transaction, you can think of strong customer authentication as the requirement that you provide 2 out of these 3 kind of categories of proof. So you can either provide something that you have, something you own, like a smartphone authenticator or USB token. You can provide something that only you should know, which is obviously like a password, PIN, anything like that, and provide something that you kind of uniquely are. So this is inherent in their language, but we can think of it as biometrics, scanning your fingerprint or facial recognition. So you as a customer would provide 2 out of these, and if they meet the requirements, then the transaction can proceed. So that's what it looks like from the customer side, but obviously we're worried also about behind the scenes. So how do those strong customer authentication elements actually make their way to all of the relevant parties who need to assess them and give the green light to the transaction? So there's certainly other options that are not present on this slide, but for the sake of a quick recap, the 2 most popular options right now are the EMVCo 3D Secure standard. I think we're at 2.2. Obviously rumors of 2.3, but we'll see when that hits. So this is an EMVCo standard. It does require merchants to send additional data on top of what they had been sending, like price and who's what the payment mechanism is. So this is a lot more data that's being bundled into that transaction and sent on its way for assessment purposes. 3D Secure 2 is a huge improvement over 3DS1. 3DS1 used to kick you out into kind of this strange looking third-party website where you entered a password that you probably didn't remember. So definitely a lot better in terms of time savings and overall ease of use. I think around 15% of card not present transactions are currently using one form of 3DS. Very quickly, we'll talk about delegated authentication. That is definitely something that could use its own webinar, but Essentially, it means that authentication is done at a different level that shifts liability and has the potential for allowing merchants to really keep more control over that authentication process and user experience. The second option is open banking. These open APIs are what we talked about earlier. You know, they're designed to allow for the more easier movement of financial data through different companies and new industry players. So you as a user would authorize what companies or organizations you want to be able to access your data, and they would be able to provide you with, you know, more tools, perhaps some cost savings, and enable, you know, payments maybe directly from your bank account where previously you used to have to use a credit card. So those are the behind the scenes options for how the data is moving along, but in terms of what your actual options are for implementing those, you know, those three elements of inherent, possession, and knowledge, there are a couple options that the regulations actually talk about. So this is a small passage from a long regulation, but obviously a document from the European Union and the European Banking Authority is not going to say, hey, go use this product. They are going to stay technologically neutral, but they do offer some recommendations. So they suggest that maybe one-time passwords are something your organization could think about. We've all done this too many times to think of. This is where you're trying to log into your bank and your bank says, hey, wait a minute, we don't recognize this device you're on. We're going to send you a 6-digit code to your cell phone or email, and you should bring it back to this and enter it here so that we know that you are who you say you are, or at least they know that you have a device that you had at the time of account creation. So obviously not super fun to do it a couple times a day. My memory is not great, so I'm always checking back and forth, and it takes, you know, half a minute or so. This is appealing to some companies because it is very easy to implement, but that is, you know, a benefit that quickly goes away once you realize how expensive it gets, that every time a user wants to log in, you're firing off a text message to them. So depending on your SMS providers, the costs will vary, but either way, not super fun to pay every time a user wants to log in. Also important to note that as of January, one-time passwords no longer count as a knowledge element. So a couple of links there for when we send this out. You can read more about that change. The regulations also have this kind of vague category they call other cryptographic assertions. So these are things like smart cards and smart card readers, or maybe those little tokens with numbers that change every 60 seconds. So still not, you know, a very clean user experience, but certainly some other challenges as well. These are, I don't know how many people might have a smart card reader handy at home to make use of this. If you have one, please let us know, and I'll admit that I was wrong in the question section. But aside from having, you know, these strange hardware requirements, these are often proprietary solutions that are not going to work from one merchant to the next, one issuer to the next. So there's really the question of, sure, you can implement these and they are secure, but how many different mechanisms are you going to implement, and how realistic is that? So the third one they call out is digital signatures. So a big hint at where we're going to go next. Digital signatures are definitely the most secure option. So this is what really is behind a lot of the standards that you're already familiar with, TLS, and a bunch of other ones. FIDO, the topic of the rest of the talk, is based upon digital signature technology. And really before FIDO, digital signatures were very complicated to implement. They required a huge team to really manage them and figure out, you know, the infrastructure for that. They were hugely expensive to maintain, but FIDO does change all that. So some of the pitfalls of public key infrastructure are addressed by the FIDO Alliance. They're they're really striving to be as simple as possible and easy to maintain. So FIDO, for those who might be new to it today, step one, you need, in order to have FIDO authentication, you do need to have a human user. So a lot of people ask, hey, is FIDO something that can be used for device-to-device authentication? The answer is, if you're using FIDO as it was intended to be used, then you will require a human user. That human user will have a FIDO certified authenticator. So this is any Windows PC that has Windows Hello, any MacBook with Touch ID, any recent version of an Android phone, and obviously all the USB authenticators that are also certified. So these are all things that you probably have a couple on your desk right now. You might be watching on a device that is a FIDO certified authenticator right now. It's really kind of the key benefit that people don't need to go out and buy something different just to use FIDO authentication, nor do they have to change their habits. So the FIDO certified authenticator will communicate with the FIDO Aware platform. FIDO Aware platform, any major browser, any major operating system, these are all FIDO compatible. Really a huge benefit that it has such a wide presence in the industry already. So the one portion that will need to be modified in order to use FIDO, let's say I'm trying to sell shoes and I have a shoe selling website. If I want to allow FIDO authentication to that, I would need to modify my shoe selling application to accept the FIDO credentials. So that is one portion that needs to be modified, but once you modify it, it can accept any authenticator and be accessed by any FIDO Aware platform. And I did mean to say FIDO certified authenticator. We always need to look for the certification, and that's also another area where StrongKey comes in. So we provide the FIDO server, which kind of underpins this entire transaction. It handles the backend cryptography, it handles the user management, communicates with the applications in the platform. StrongKey has had a FIDO certified server for pretty much as long as FIDO has been around. We did our U2F server, I think, in 2015, and more recently our FIDO 2 server in 2019. So FIDO, we've known about FIDO for a while, and we've been working with it closely for half a decade. And StrongKey is very unique because our FIDO server is the only certified server that is completely open source. So we'll touch on that a little again at the end. But so why do you want to use FIDO for compliance to SCA? FIDO is a nonprofit industry alliance that really has participation from industry members. There's national governments, there's universities. So a really diverse group is coming together to make sure the standard is as productive and secure as it possibly could be. For PSD2 in particular, these are some of the the big financial names that are a part of the FIDO Alliance. So these are the folks who are making the rules for EMV standards, and at the same time participating in FIDO and making sure that they stay aligned. The FIDO standards do evolve over time. There are a bunch of working groups. StrongKey is on several of them that are all working to keep the standards relevant. So there's one for specifically for European deployments. There's one for how to get folks to adopt it more easily. There's a ton of effort being done to make sure that FIDO is a solution that can work for a long time for a lot of different companies. We talked about a couple of the different authentication user experiences, typing in codes and maybe finding a smart card reader or maybe not finding one. FIDO is definitely going to top all of that. So they have what they call single gesture authentication. So these are things that you probably already do a dozen times an hour. So it's going to be unlocking your phone with Face ID. That Face ID down the line will be FIDO authentication, and on Android it already is. Fingerprint scanning, that's single gesture authentication. Entering a PIN. So it really doesn't require you to learn any new behavior. It doesn't require you to get any new devices. There's estimates that there's over 2.5 billion devices that currently today support FIDO already. So definitely don't need to go out and buy something just for FIDO. Your smartphone and computer are probably already going to work with that. FIDO is very easily scalable. So we talked about how the costs of SMS OTP go up as your transaction amounts go up, but that's not the case with specifically StrongKey's FIDO server. So that's the only one I can comment on, but we do not charge based on transactions. You can deploy our FIDO server and then use it for however many transactions you want. FIDO certification really is guaranteeing that not only is everything going to work together seamlessly, but you as a company offering FIDO to your users, you don't need to worry about what devices might work better, might work differently. If it's certified, then it's going to work, and your users can be comfortable with whatever device they choose. What I haven't mentioned yet is that very recently, FIDO authors from the FIDO Alliance and from EMVCO actually sat down together and put out what they called a technical note specifically around FIDO authentication and EMV3DS. So this is a little bit like studying for a test, with the teacher who has the answer key next to her. You have the folks who are asking for what they want in the 3DS message and checking boxes for what FIDO data elements they want you to send along. So StrongKey's FIDO server already does all of these 10 things. It's really trivial to package up and send as part of a 3DS message. So what better way to comply than to use the suggestions of the folks who are going to be deciding whether you're in full compliance or not. So yes, FIDO is great for compliance, but as I promised, there are a ton of reasons that people who have never heard of PSD2 are still looking at FIDO. There's use cases that get more fleshed out and productive every day. A lot of people go to FIDO because it is the most secure way to authenticate users, and a lot of people come to StrongKey because we go even beyond the FIDO protocols to make sure that our implementation is even more secure. So as I said, we've been around for 20 years and FIDO's been around for about 7. So we have a lot of expertise that we can apply to the FIDO server and do things like prevent any other possible attacks that might come on the database. For example, we digitally sign the database. We make use of FIPS certified cryptographic hardware in our FIDO server. So FIDO is great. People use it for security as well as compliance, but the StrongKey FIDO server is really a unique combination that should be the most secure on the market. A lot of people are interested in FIDO because it represents a huge opportunity to save some money. So if you have a help desk and a lot of that time is dedicated to resetting user passwords, that's something that goes away if you eliminate passwords. A ton of money could be saved there. We know that people that kind of these cyber insurance companies are requiring smaller payments and premiums for those using FIDO because it is more secure and completely eliminates the possibility of password phishing. We talked about eliminating OTP fees, but even if you're not worried about the transactional costs of each SMS and whatever costing money to your company, there's really a lot of benefit that can come from relying on a standardized approach. So down the line, we know that the European regulations are going to evolve, and we know that the FIDO standards are going to evolve, but they will evolve together and make sure that FIDO will make sure that they stay aligned in a way that really only a company that is very dedicated to the protocols and staying certified is going to be able to keep up with. So it's not really something you want to dedicated team to it. Your organization, it'll take up a lot of resources, especially when it's definitely simpler and cheaper to use something like the StrongKey FIDO server for that. This is, you know, a lot of folks are also starting to think about how FIDO can be used to really remove some of the tools that they've built up over the last decade or so that are no longer even needed if you implement FIDO. So things like eliminating your complicated and expensive single sign-on schemes, there's a way for FIDO to get you around that. So the cost savings are really, really immense depending on how much you can commit to buying into FIDO. And FIDO really has a ton of use cases, even though they call themselves, you know, eliminating passwords. There's a ton of different ways to use FIDO. So StrongKey's FIDO server, as I said, is completely open source, and that's not the only reason it's pretty unique. So our FIDO server is more than just, you know, a library of code that you push towards your developers and ask them to implement. It is actually more like a tool that is completely ready to deploy. So we've already worried about everything like the performance, the clustering, the high availability, the disaster recovery, and you really don't need to learn the guts of FIDO in order to use our server. So we've done what we think are the tricky, you know, cryptographic bits, and we just expose simple web services so that you can integrate in a matter of hours, if not, you know, a little longer than that. StrongKey's FIDO server can be deployed in a handful of different ways, and I'm sure that after I talk about this slide, someone will ask about, you know, an even more customized approach, and we'll talk through it with them too, because we're always looking to make our solutions fit customer environments. You can go for the on-premise solution. You can take delivery of a physical server, put it in your data center, and make sure that, you know, it's locked down to your standards. If you don't want to take ownership of that physical hardware, then we have our secure data centers that we can put it in. It's a little less effort for you, but still the same level of security. And for those who are completely cloud-based, we do offer a containerized FIDO server. We do recommend using cryptographic hardware on the back end, but certainly a conversation to have depending on your specific environment. Unlikely that you'll find a FIDO server that is more affordable in the long run than ours. So we're open source. Go to GitHub, check out our FIDO server. We have a bunch of tutorials and, you know, sample applications that you can play with immediately. We do not charge licensing fees. We do not charge per transaction. Yeah, not much more to say about that other than we really want our FIDO server to be accessible to organizations of all sizes, and we think that being open source and making it, you know, available in that way is the way to go. So pretty big summary slide, definitely to maybe take a screenshot of and look at later, or look at when we send this out. Overall message is that it's pretty clear that once you start comparing StrongKey's FIDO server to any of the other solutions that are being suggested for compliance and even beyond compliance, it's pretty clear that the FIDO server, StrongKey's FIDO server, is going to come out on top. We've put a lot of effort and had a lot of, you know, customization done around what can most benefit our users and our customers, and I think certainly if you look into it and have a conversation with us, we'd be happy to explain that as well. So I think I took a little too long, but here's some resources. We're obviously happy to stick around and answer questions for sure. I don't know if we want to do that now, but I will point out one resource, the one with the big purple star next to it, how FIDO meets the RTS requirements for strong customer authentication. We contributed to that alongside FIDO, so do check that out and come to us with any questions that you might have.